Can you hear us all right, Terry?
Yes, thank you. Yep.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody. We've got apologies for the whole meeting from Robin, and we have apologies for lateness from Martin. But he is on his way, and we don't have a public forum. Just get my rounds. Oh, and yes. So me and Gary. Thank you. Are there any items not on the agenda?
No, there's no items that are not on the agenda, but up for discussion. I think May, from my reports, making a number of issues.
Well, that's fine. That's out. Yeah.
Whether they develop or the same.
Okay. So we've got the minutes of the meeting of the 14th of October. You were there, Terry. Are they true and correct record first?
Yeah, happy to move that they're a true and correct record.
Right, I'll second that. Is there any issues on there that anyone wants to raise or clarify that isn't covered in the other reports, etc.?
No.
Okay, thank you. So we're on to 2.1, which is the summer risk assessment.
Madam Chair, so this is a summary. It's the first of probably two reports, but this one here is in two parts. It's the internal assessment of council and their functional risks and mitigations, and it's also a look at the external risks. So I'll take the report as read, but I'll just go through the highlights. So internally, as most people are aware, our staffing levels are going to be probably critically low. We're talking about 88% plus, which means that in excess of 200 staff out of about 270 are going to be on leave, which just means that if we do have a serious incident, we may we'll have to call on all of our resources.
Yes.
So what has happened, and firstly I do need to put an apology for comms, because comms are the number one key department that we work with, and I omitted them from my key department list.
Right.
So I apologise to Michael and his team, because it's so obvious I forgot to write it.
So they're part of the team, really.
So they are the front end of the team, so comms. So comms, all the essential departments, so we're talking communications, IT, operations, they've all got themselves organised, they have staff on call, they have their rosters, they have everything in place. The business continuity plans have been reviewed and replaced, and the pandemic plan that relates to the whole council has been reviewed and circulated as well. So we've done all we can in terms of preparation internally. So just going through, we have a crisis management team is set up. Now what has happened is a senior GM, Bruce, is going to be on call with me over those key set days. So should anything, we have a major operational issue, Bruce and I will get together and we'll call the crisis management team who are available, and we'll include some of the comms, of course. So we'll be skinny on the ground, but we'll have that internal operational function available to us.
Cool.
Bearing in mind that should it escalate, let's just say that we have a major operational issue as a result of an external storm, say a major storm, then civil defence will take over, or NEMA will take over, and we'll bring the crisis management team into that operation, and we'll just boost it up from there. Just a reminder to the committee that sometimes it gets lost, is that TCDC is responsible for local civil defence, or local emergency management.
Yeah.
It often gets spoken, well, it's a group issue, but it's not. It's our responsibility, and we've got our team here. But it's important to understand that we have emergency management internally, but we also have our emergency management civil defence responsibilities externally. COVID-19 resurgence. Good that Julian's here, because I might, during this report, actually even now, sort of pass it on to Julian, because COVID As we know, we've been through 2, 3 and 4.
Yeah.
It's a different landscape now, so there's no government drop report.
Absolutely.
So we've got.
So we're talking about regional leadership teams and stuff like that I was picking up on at the meeting.
I got a question. Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
I just go back to Gary's little concern, and I just wondered if we've just picked up that over Christmas period, if there was a major emergency, and I just need to just throw this way, Gary, to see if it's you're feeling comfortable with it, to having that staffing available for an event. I know that the chief executive is pushing a lot of people to go on leave and trying to do that, so I'm just trying to support you in that role if you see that issue. I just saw a red flag then, that's all.
Yeah, it is. Based on experience, Terry, what happens, and I refer back to January the 5th, 2018, Julian was here then, when Thames Coast Road got, that big storm came through. The number of staff that responded and came back from leave to be involved was amazing. So we have that underlying confidence of support there, as well as what the staff have already structured in. So yeah, reasonably confident. We just have to keep our fingers crossed, but it is what it is. And
I think the other thing for me, Terry, is that staff welfare is crucial, and we're living in certain uncertain times, and everyone could stay over Christmas and it could go blissfully well, and then we could get a COVID level 3 in March and everyone's exhausted and had no break. So in this game, it is about assessment of risk, and I hope we don't have to rely on the goodwill of people coming back, but I also know that they will if we need it. So it is a balance, Terry, and just getting that right.
Yeah, and I just think it was worth to discuss it to make sure that we're comfortable. So we'll take it on. We know the risk and we're prepared for it. So great. So I just needed to be, making sure we're supporting you, Gary, if you need it. That's all.
thanks for that, Terry.
Okay.
Back to COVID. To Julian, regional leadership.
I think if you don't mind, I'll just add some to the last conversation before I go on to COVID. TCDC's the same as many others, so I think Gary's absolutely right. You have a responsibility under the legislation to provide for emergency management, and you have a risk profile that is higher than others in the region. So when you look at it on the face of things, 88% abstraction for a higher risk profile, it is a red flag. I think that's the word I'd use. It's a red flag, but it's the same for everybody. And what we do, and we see elsewhere regionally, it's look, people need to take a lead. People need to have that balance, but we need to have a contingency plan where it's actually a step further than goodwill. Yeah. It's not goodwill that we're relying on. It's process and understanding this is the staffing level and who's going to be in the region. So I know I'm in the region, even though I'm on leave, I'm in the region for 3 of those weeks. But so who's available should we need to? So it's less than goodwill, it's a step beyond, it's a contingency. Yeah. But recognising that contingency will have flaws because you can't expect people to remain sober and all the rest of it. But there's some risk management in that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, cool. And I'm confident, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we've got the people on the deck and we've got a plan underneath that pre-goodwill.
So that's the plan there. So what has happened for the first time is that HR or people in capability have come into the space for us. So everything you see in green is staff availability. So while staff way down the bottom you see comms as usual, there's a lot of red in there, but there's green everywhere. They are available. And so that's where we get our level of confidence that should the balloon go up.
And that's the step beyond goodwill.
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
So just continuing on from what Julian's saying too, just to add into Julian, and I think you've hit the nail on the head about having those people available and understanding that 500,000 more people will be on the peninsula over the Christmas period this year.
Yeah.
So that talks about congestion, it talks about getting access to A to B and all that stuff. So these are another parts of the contingency, I suppose, that need to be considered.
Thanks, Terry.
So going on to the COVID resurgence, Madam Chair, you've already talked about regional leadership groups, etc. So I do apologise, but you're going to hear about it a little bit again, but I'm going to try and contextualise it a little bit more. I think the easiest way to describe this is that COVID resurgence planning and COVID response, civil defence are not the lead agency. I need to be really clear, civil defence are not the lead agency. This will not be run, a COVID resurgence will not be run under a civil defence declaration or under civil defence legislation. There is the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act of 2020, which was put in place for any resurgence issues legislatively going forward. And the way to describe it is there's been tactical, so if you look at COVID was very much a health response, go back to level 4.
Yeah.
COVID was a health response combined with a welfare response. Yeah. And civil defence got brought into both for different reasons. Got brought into the health response because of a need to support community-based assessment centres and to logistically support the security and all the other non-health components to deliver that testing regime. And then on a welfare front, it was the obvious one. It was where the central government agencies were not able to manage and cope with the demand because of the level 4 lockdown nationwide, and civil defence was asked to not just coordinate, but it was actually operationally deliver a lot of those welfare services, included in this region running an 0800 number, and it was most regions, civil defence picked up an 0800 number for that needs assessment of those welfare needs. So fast forward to the Auckland experience of level 3, and the support for health was still an issue. So the support for health in terms of logistics and CBACs, so community-based assessment centres and pop-up centres, was still the same. The demand came because of the agencies and the roadblocks, and it was around the communication rather than the coordination. It was around a central hub for communication, and it was a small piece of welfare, because there's been extra strategic and tactical monies provided to MSD and social service agencies to be able to manage with any new demand that comes out of a resurgence of COVID. So on that basis, there is no expectation that civil defence will lead the response to a COVID resurgence. What we are being asked to do, and it's a singular role, and that singular role is the group controller is being asked in a national plan to lead the operational coordination, but it's actually, there's no powers there. It literally is relationships and systems and processes. And it's about ensuring, so the direction is coming from the central government department. So this is going to be health related, so Ministry of Health. This is going to be social service related, so it's going to be MSD, Kainga Orangutanariki. It's going to be those agencies who have central plans that push down to their regional agencies. And I'm being asked to support that through a coordination and making sure there is some visibility, and there is some visibility, and we're delivering on the plans that the agencies have designed. So they have their own plans. So if there is an issue with that coordination, there is now a regional leadership group. There's nothing to do with civil defence, but it has local government representation on it, it has central government representation on it, it has iwi representation on it, to ensure that the planning the agencies do and the resurgence response that we provide is meeting the needs of the community, and it provides us with an escalation process. If one of the agencies, coming back to no power to tell someone what to do, so if the police roadblocks, for example, are causing an issue and we are unable to resolve it, i.e. through a relationship, then I can escalate that to the regional leadership group, who will escalate that nationally if need be to the police commissioner and the other national bodies to say, this is what is occurring.
So January the 3rd, somebody wanders into the Whangamata Medical Centre showing signs of COVID. They test They self-isolate at home for 24 hours, but there's 20 people on the front lawn. That comes back positive. What is our role in that?
So our role in that is, well, in terms of civil defence, in terms of councils.
In terms of us as well as civil defence, yeah.
So this is where civil defence doesn't come into it. Civil defence, I don't teach you what you know, but civil defence is bottom up. We build from the bottom, we set our direction, and we are coordinated regionally and nationally if we need to.
Yeah.
Forget it. This will be what will our role be will be determined by the response at central government level. This is a top down. So the response to that, I can give you.
It will be a health one.
It will be a health response, but with it will be a massive health response. But there will be a central, all of government process around it. So I will give you my forecast for that event because that's part of my role. But I'll caveat it by saying this is just Julian's view on what will happen. If you got that precise example, then all of a sudden that would create a Prime Minister and Cabinet and Ministry of Health because of the density of the population here. That will cause create a meeting. That meeting will, without no doubt whatsoever, say it's now a risk and a big one, and therefore we're going to go into some form of level restrictions. But the borders or the parameters of that restriction will be set at central government level. We will be told what they are, and then based on previous decisions and consistent decisions by central government, we'll be given 48 hours notice that lockdown is coming, and people will be encouraged to go home. People will be encouraged to go back to where they came from. Now that will cause a huge issue for Ministry of Health. Because you're now sending people back to where they come from, so they're not just testing locally, they're now having to test where people are going back to. You in Thames will end up with a lot of people who don't go home, because they will say, these are my holiday homes, people will not go home. That would be my hypothesis on that. Our role will then be, at a central level, we have a concept of operations or a response framework that says there is a single now a single EOC, an enhanced EOC at Hamilton, supported with staff from all the councils, and at a local level, and that is for intelligence gathering, that's for coordination, that is for logistics if required, in terms of extra staffing, etc. But what will end up at a local level is a small incident control point, and that will be for the comms, a big position in terms of comms, but it'll be BAU comms on steroids. There will be an operational welfare component at a local level for those. There would have to be a threshold that MSD and others say. If somebody phoned in and said we need something now, it will take us 24 hours. So if somebody needs anything within that 24-hour window, that is the role of local welfare. So that's the kind of threshold, and that's the kind of role of local welfare. But that would be our role. Our role is to facilitate the other agencies to deliver their plans with a relatively small, potentially small welfare component, bigger here than elsewhere because of the 500,000 people that Terry's talking about. Many of whom won't go home in that scenario, but it'll be that limited 24-hour window, I suspect, of MSD won't be able, or Kang or others will not be able to respond within that 24 hours.
So how do you reckon that's going to go? It hasn't been tested yet, really, has it?
Well, no, it was tested in Auckland, and the Auckland experience was one of the group manager would say that it was a very frustrating experience for her because there was a coordination centre set up. So the welfare did what it was expected to do. The coordination centre was set up for the purpose of bringing together the agencies predominantly to understand how their plans were operating or operating against each other or dovetailing as they should have. But because it was in the civil defence, it was within the civil defence EOC, when the borders were becoming problematic, and I was one of the people who was raising it on behalf of Waikato District Council, when those issues were becoming problematic, I was phoning the group controller at Auckland saying, you need to sort this out. The borders are not working properly. These are the feedback we're getting, that some of you are getting across, some are not. that is causing an issue in terms of social service provision that they provide, which have a knock-on effect for MSD. How can we resolve it? Her reply to me is, all I can do is go and have a conversation with the police. All I can do is go and try and influence the policy around that and see if the exemptions can be changed. All I can do is escalate that nationally to Ministry of Health and say, these are challenges, what can we do in terms of changing the exemption process? But it's very limited, but you're the face. She became the face of it. And when things weren't changing, she was criticised unfairly, because it was as if, well, you're the group controller, you can do this, you can make people do stuff in an emergency. And that's why I've got to be really clear, we cannot. This is literally using a skill set and experience, not using the powers under the Act.
Yeah.
So possibly that summary says it's likely to be very clunky at best. I mean, I don't have a high level of confidence at all in this, in the rapid response requirement that we would probably expect should we have a January 30 outbreak on the farm.
But I think that's Gary. But I'm going to say to you, I think, the Chair, I'm going to say to you, it's your expectations of a civil defence event, and I would agree with you that if the expectation levels are being set on what you would reasonably expect to see from a civil defence response operating under the Civil Defence Act with all the powers that come with that, I would agree with you. So if this is not, but unfortunately, fortunately for you, unfortunately for me, they've decided it's the group controller who's going to be the face of this. I have real concerns. I've raised these at Joint Committee, I've raised these at KEG, in terms of the reputational issues that has, not just for as me as an individual, forget that. It's the organisation in civil defence brand. You're leading this. No, we are not.
Right. So the best thing is prevention. So no COVID would be very useful. And if something happens, we've got a plan, and certainly the Prime Minister and Cabinet.
So I know through the group comms is working with our comms, and a lot of messaging is about basic COVID prevention methods.
Really important.
And the QR code.
And they've brought in the Bluetooth thing
today.
starts today or tomorrow, so hopefully that will increase.
So we'll be hammering that, and we'll be working with comms to just push.
Right.
So a couple of things I want to flag on that, which I wrote down to. So there's a report that came out, and I know Gary loves the report, and I know Rob loves the report, and Helen loves the report. We do forget the detail, the numbers. There's a report that's come out from DPMC, and the numbers are questionable. Okay, I think that's fair to say. But other than to say, it talks about nearly 600,000, 599,000 people so it's over Terry's 500,000. It's over the local analysis of 400,000. Irrespective of the numbers, what it's really clearly saying is that we can expect a huge influx of people in this region, and the place is full. We just know the place is full. Okay, so forget the numbers, place is full. Place is full of outside visitors. And I suspect human nature, social science, and all the rest of it is when, and the report highlights this bit, it says that pro-social behaviour during Christmas does not lend itself to the checking in and the hygiene, the social distancing, and the numbers are representative. So we know that Christmas social behaviour is going to be a risk for us. But I think it's also going to be a risk when you've got a local population that probably does, on the whole, and I'm making an assumption, but a local population that is very wary, and particularly the more remote communities, of the risk of the pandemic. And then they're going to see people from outside, whether it is from the South Island or elsewhere in the North Island, coming into the peninsula and doing nothing. So you do have there's a risk of friction between the tourists and the locals in terms of you're coming here and you're not even following the rules, you're not being polite, you're not being kind.
That was certainly evident last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, it really has, the comms, I think Helen hits the nail bang on the head. She went to Beach Hop It doesn't matter how many QR codes you've got, people will have not used the QR codes, and there's hundreds of thousands of people. So it's how do we change our comms? And these comms are national comms, but how do we add to those to try and get it across to people? If you're coming here, this is what you need to do. This is what we expect, and getting people to not drop their guard. That's going to be massive. We did have, as Gary and Helen were at a meeting with me yesterday. So this is about saying to the agencies such as health, and particularly health. I've got one this afternoon for MS and for EWE, but it was saying to health yesterday, this is your plan, health. If this goes off in Thames, you know from this detail I've got across the region, I've got Thames-Coromandel, I've got Waikato District Council, and I've got Waikato District Council in terms of hotspot areas for holidays. The Waikato has come out in this report as a tourist destination of choice, really has. And so what are the DHB doing, knowing that they've got this information? What does their plan look like? And I was really clear yesterday that this isn't a case of picking up the phone on the day and saying we need to do something, because quite rightly, as came out in the conversation, the previous locations that we had, such as Thames Hospital or Whangamata Health Centre or other places where there would be CBACs, community testing centres, probably not relevant anymore given the context of a large influx of people.
Yeah.
So health need to revisit that. They've agreed to revisit their plan, and we're going to do a workshop before we close for Christmas to run through their plan and see how we would support it in terms of that health response locally and regionally, and where the gaps are. So that's positive.
Julian, that is fantastic information. Really what we're all about at the moment is understanding the issues before we step into them. So that really concerned me about the DHB, what you've said, but also the way you've covered this. This is what we really do need to get, that resilience, because like you say, the hospitals and the medical centres won't cope anyway. They'll just fall right out of this loop. So yeah, I just think those questions should be asked. So well done there.
Yeah, so that's ongoing, and the chief executive of the DHB is on side with that. So it's really positive. There's no friction. There's none of that. It's good partnership working. And the only risk I'm going to flag with you, and it's in the report, and it talks to what's in Gary's report, is we're talking about two different things. We're separating out COVID, and there will be a regional response for COVID, and then we're talking about, but if there was a landslip or there was something, then you've got enough staff to come in, and you've got really good contingency plans around who's available. And it also says in the report, and Gary's articulated it, there will be support from the wider region for a landslip, and there would be. Gary would phone me up and we would find you resources that you would need to come in to augment that. That's the key game. The big risk is when the two happen together.
Yeah.
Okay. The concurrent event, and that will be that would be. It would still be managed, but it would put some strain on the staff.
It would probably increase to a wider regional, even a national response if the two happen together this year.
But we're not talking doomsday prep here. You look at, I'm sure Gary's got it in the report.
Yeah.
You look at the forecast, and we are looking at ex-subtropical cyclones for the Waikato for this season. So this is not myth and story.
This is pre. Yeah. Thank you very much. Back to you all. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll carry on. Hopefully, when Martin arrives, we've got two PowerPoints today, and Chair, one from Pamela regarding community response plans, one from Helen regarding the deployment. Hopefully, we'll wait till Martin arrives. We'll do those, but Helen will talk about the community response plans, and she's going to do a presentation on what they are. The funding, the key thing is that the DPMC have confirmed that there is funding available should more vulnerable communities become short of water. We're talking about maybe the Manaia communities, etc. We give the resources to keep those camps full and those people healthy with fish water.
That feels really important. So what is the comms plan around that, so that people that do need it know, and people that want to wash their skis don't know it? You know,
So,
like,
yes, so we
that's
do,
bad English, but do you know what I mean? Like, there was a joke, you know, all of us Remington will be phoning in, you know, and so it's sort of like, I haven't been talking about that because it's felt as if it's a precious resource for the most.
and that's the way it stays. We don't do any comms on it at all. And what we have is the likes of Frank and staff in the communities, and they feel out where the necessary community response that is got out. We have examples of multi-millionaires accessing free water at Hahe as a result of hearing about the free water. And they slip through the radar and tighten that up.
Yeah, and so the likes of Bubbles and that, they would feed in if there was a challenge at Kennedy's Bay or the Nile or something like that.
Very locally driven, very low down. We have a very good system in place. It works really, really well. And we're going to try and keep it that way. So that is reassuring for us.
And you'd have heard, sorry, through yourself, just to support that conversation, you'd have heard the joint committee, the update, the parameters and for the millionaire stuff that we're talking about from central government are really wide. So it really does require a local process that restricts that, because you as a council are going to pay for this initially and then claim it back.
Yes.
So there's that, and there's some coordination. And if it's a free-for-all in terms of comms, you're creating a huge demand.
Yeah.
Irrespective of the moral and ethical issues, you're creating a huge demand. The system that Gary put in place here and Helen and Pam last year, or was it this year, it's been already been flagged regionally to turn around and say, because people are now asking at the joint committee, so go and speak to Thames, they've got a good system in place, you don't want to make this a free-for-all. So go and see what they've done.
Cool, well done team.
Yeah.
Welcome Martin.
So
we're on the summer risk assessment.
on page 8 now. Cool. So yes, last week Joe's Farm got their consent for 2 concerts in Whangatā over New Year. So there's potentially another 20,000 people could be descending on Whangatā over that Christmas period. So that we have emergency plans in place for them, which on Friday I'm going to speed up and go through again. Now that they've got their consent, just making sure that all the marbles are in the bag.
We're a little concerned still, Gary, with that too, obviously. With only 4,000 staying over on the campsite, it does put 10 or 15,000 people moving around into the towns. So yes, expect some congestion and maybe some action. I'm not too sure how it'll all go, but we're crossing fingers here a little bit because they weren't going to bust them into town, but now it's sort of a.
So it'll be very, very similar to the last consent they had. So yeah, you're right, it'll be a lot of fingers crossed. But going on to externally, Ted too mentioned the figure of 500,000. We have our local evidence that maybe a 30% increase, which could be up to 400,000. But once again, the Coromandel will be full over that peak period from the 25th to the 11th. We know that. All the campgrounds are full. You can't get a mobile home, and we expect a number of sections or properties to have multiple keys and cars and that sort of thing. So it's just a matter of we manage it normally pretty well, and this year we expect.
So through that, Gary, I just sorry if I keep cutting in, sorry, but it's all really important stuff. Can we get access to a helicopter or something like that? If you have to, the roads will be impassable. You just will not get around, especially if you're going up through the Coromandel area, through Tyrol with 3 or 4 one-way bridges. We know it's going to be manic. How do we get around this coast if we need to in a hurry, an emergency situation?
So Terry, if you can save that question for about 10 minutes, we're going to get Leanne Ryan from NZTA on the line.
Yeah.
And Leanne will answer that question for you very admirably, I'm sure. So just hold that one for a couple of minutes, because it's really important that Liam is here with us.
You've got your,
Yep.
all your red lights and your sirens for your team.
Okay, so once again, just finishing off, we've got a lot of technology improvements over the last few years, but one of the things we're going to be promoting through comms is there's alternative methods of alerting, the Red Cross app, and you've got the cell alert and all that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
we're just going to be promoting those. King Tide, so what I have here for elected members, Terry, I'll put it in Robin's box. I'm going to give you the next year's King Tide chart, and this is quite interesting because what it does, it'll give you an indication of when the highest tides are going to be the Thames, and which are relevant to New Zealand. But it's a good little chart because if we have a storm brewing, all you need to do is look on this, and when you get the highest read, you say, oh, okay, those two don't mix well. And this is one of the indicators that we actually look at. So I'll be passing those around. And I'm going to also pass around, this is an indication of next Wednesday and Friday. And you'll notice that up on the top of the subtropics there's a little low forming, and it's just an indication of what we look at. And so that's 7 days out, but you'll see there's Wednesday and then there's Friday. I can pass a couple around now. And you just see that we start to monitor trends this early on because we have to. And that's a real range of the subtropical low that could to the left or right or anyway. And we don't know until a couple of days before. So once again, Terry, I'll put that in your box.
Thank you.
So just on wildfire, although you don't, we can't sort of visualise it here because it's so humid and damp, but wildfire risk is going to go through the roof shortly.
Yeah.
We have a protocol with FENS, which is locked in, and we talk about it a lot, is that we will declare a civil defence emergency immediately they call us to say things are bad, and we will lock it. So we've learned from experience from Coma Road, not declaring early. They're on board, they're keen, because it just means they just focus on the fire, we do everything else for them. But once again, it'll be a regional or wider response should we have a wildfire. Pretty concerning for the guys at the moment. And of course, all this rapid growth that's going on is...
Yeah, it's just fuel for fire, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think people get a bit of a feeling, oh, well, we've had the rain in November, so therefore we're going to be all right. But as you say, that fuels some growth, which dries out in no time at all, and all of a sudden it's actually worse than if you didn't, So it's probably something we need to get out, that yes, we've had that rain, but it hasn't necessarily helped.
Yeah.
So, have you finished the summer program?
Yeah, I was just going on to the second part of that report, if there's anything in there. I'm going to page 13, probably just to highlight what we've just been talking about, is that there are only 2 places in the southern hemisphere that have got elevated risks of severe storms or cyclones, and one is the North Island of New Zealand. So it's never happened before, so that's quite concerning. And of course, just flicking over there, the evidence of when it last happened to us was in 2018. When you had a perfect storm, you had a king tide, or we had a cyclone, and they mixed together, and they actually came back. We were going home, and they came back and bit us on the bum. Economically wise, I don't know whether Michael, you can add anything to this report from the ED department. It's pretty buoyant at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. Visitor spending was way up from the year before. I think the last time it was measured around September, and the expectations of visitor numbers are high for the summer. So that bodes well for all those hospitality outfits.
Good. So yeah, so things are not too bad on the Coromandel. I just want to refer to page 16, please, regarding tsunami. Now, about 4 weeks ago, we had the pleasure of sitting with Jose Guerrero, who in 2012 to 2015 led the modelling of tsunami the impacts of tsunami on the Coromandel. So we did the east coast first, and then in more recent times did the west coast. And we sat with Jose over in Hamilton, and it was a very good meeting. But what Jose really brought home was the real facts about a tsunami affecting us. So when you look at the top of the East Cape, so you've got the Tiroa, Hicks Bay, you know, where that Thames-Coromandel trench goes, it's all in little spines. It's all in like 50-kilometre radiuses blocks. And it would have to ping in a particular block to blow sideways to affect us in the Coromandel. And Jose really brought it home that it's pretty unlikely that it would actually ping right into the Coromandel because of the way that little Thames-Coromandel trench is. And of course, when you do have an undersea earthquake, it blows like sleeves. It blows out that way, and it just goes wherever the angle is. But what he did say, and he reinforced that the true fact is that we'll have an earthquake, it'll knock us off our feet, and then we have an hour to get sorted.
Right.
We don't have 10 minutes, we don't have 15 minutes, we should yield an hour, which gives NEMA, it gives GNS Science, it gives all those guys an idea. The thing is, we'll knock you off your feet, and the message long, get gone will certainly resonate with people when they get, feel like a very severe earthquake. So the natural signs will indicate. So we're going to push that through comms to say, put a dose of reality around this, don't worry about a tsunami, you'll know it's coming long before it arrives, and it'll give you time to
get up the hill as long as not everything.
So that was reassuring to us because he didn't, when we finished in 2015, we weren't quite sure, but he was pretty blasé about it, wasn't he?
It was the what do you call it, the bow tie of death, because that's what it does in terms of goes out.
Right.
But he actually gave us 2 latitude lines and said between these 2 latitude lines is your risk, but it's actually quite a high threshold. It's a magnitude 8. And when you get to a magnitude 8, there were 9 models, and only one of those 9 models showed significant inundation of coastline.
Wow.
So that would be, so 1 out of 9 is still 1 too many, so that's our threshold.
Yes.
But it has to be 8.59, and you would certainly feel that.
Yes. And I think that's important in terms of our other risks are much worse than that in terms of inundation and flooding, etc. Yeah.
It's turn the focus on Tory.
Yeah, Terry, you want to say something?
Yes, just microphone on. Just on the summer program, and it may not be answered just immediately, but today, one's around the cell phone coverage. Have we been in touch with the utilities around the extra cell phones towers are going to put around the Coromandel and how that's going to improve coverage? The second, obviously, is to talk about Pam can talk about her zone meetings with those out of area coverage. And the third one is the Regional Council Flood Centre. Is that still the key location for flood centre information? So they can be answered sometime today, but I just think they're good questions that I've been asked about the summer program, and would be great to hear.
So I can answer the flood room for you. Yes, the flood room is going to be manned and active throughout. I'll defer to economic development regarding the cell phones, but I understand the telcos have done what they normally do. They're wheeling their trailers and towers out around the hotspots. They've already done that because the towers are already in most places already. The third question, Terry, was?
The middle one, what was the middle one, Terry?
Around Pam's zone meetings with those ones that aren't within coverage, have they been completed? Talking to the community zones, the ones that their own resilient plans.
The community response plans.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so Pam's going to talk to that shortly. So
okay, cool.
So, Madam Chair, we've got Liam sitting at. He looks as though he's at Hawaii, and he's looking.
Hawaii.
Oh no, he's on the mount.
I think that's
very good, Gary. Yep, on the side of the mount.
You're on the mount. Yeah, that's where he is.
Good morning.
It's not very good morning. It's not very regionally relevant, is it? I'll have to do better next time.
Liam, yeah, the floor is yours. Welcome, and thanks for giving up the time to talk us about the NZTA summer planning.
Cool, no problem, and thanks for having me. If it's okay, I'd be quite interested in listening to what Pam had to talk about for community resilience type of stuff, if I'm allowed to stay on for that. But anyway, I thought, so I guess hopefully you guys would have seen that we've been doing heaps of work on the Coromandel Peninsula. So Gary asked me to come in and just give you a bit of an update on what we've got left to do on the Coromandel Peninsula over the rest of the summer. So hopefully you've seen there has been a lot of work going on. Normally we try and program to get as much work done on the Coromandel Peninsula before Christmas, because we know of the huge demands that come onto the peninsula, and we obviously want to get out of there and not affect people's holidays and enjoyment of the place. So I think we've done pretty much all of the chip sealing around the peninsula. There's only a few sites left to go in the new year, and there's a couple of asphalt concrete sites as well, which we need to do, and those are not going to start until February. So we're not going to go back in during January, when we still know we've got lots of people on the network around the place. So they'll get restarted and finished up in January. There's also a little bit of, in terms of structures and things, so there's a retaining wall that we're doing up on around Kirita. That should be all done by Christmas, and into the new year, then we're expecting that up on 25A on the Kopu Hikawai, there's a box culvert up at Cloudburst, which we'll need to do some work on, and that will just be lane closures type of thing. So that shouldn't be too much of a drama, I don't think. But again, just making sure that we're working around those peak demands. We're also very conscious we've got beach hop back again in March, so we always commit to make sure that there's no loose chip around the network in the week leading up to beach hop, because we know that people who hire out their accommodation usually do a minimum stay of a week, so people do turn up from the weekend before. And then when they do all their cruises, we also ensure that there's no works whatsoever on any of the routes of the cruises themselves. And then the last thing, in case you weren't aware, is we also run a moratorium. So over the Christmas and holiday periods, we take all the work, all the maintenance work off the networks. So there's no work allowed that might be disruptive. I've got a little map which I can share if you like, which just might give you a sense of, it just basically shows all of the work that we've got for the summer, most of which has been done. But I'll just pop that up for you. Hopefully that should come through. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Cool. So this is just a little map that we've made which shows all the different work in the different locations. So the things we still have to do are like these little green TAC, which just stands for thin asphaltic concrete. So you can see, for example, up on Pumpkin Hill, we've got a little site which needs to be done. And then there's a few of these little yellow reseals which are still left to be done. Generally, the approach we took for doing these was to sort of work clockwise around the peninsula. So we started down at Kopu and then sort of worked our way around the network. So the stuff still to be done is most likely to be down in Whiritoa area, Whangamata maybe. And we do, of course, also have that damage that's just happened to the Wentworth Bridge around Whangamata on the bypass around there. So we're going to get that done before Christmas. Sounds like Community Board are on board with that as well.
Right, thank you.
How's that for a shotgun?
Yes. Any questions or comments from people?
Terry had one for Leanne.
Yeah. You got any questions?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Look, no, that's very comprehensive actually, and great to see, and obviously lots of work gone on there. Pleased about the Wentworth Valley Bridge. The other day a truck went over there and one of its dual wheels was hanging over the edge, so that'll be nice to see on the loggers. No, it's positive to see this work, and having it done pre-Christmas has got to be a plus, so thank you.
Yeah, that's generally what we always try and do now, is to get the Coromandel done first out of the whole of the network, because the contractors who do that go all the way basically down to State Highway 29, so they've got a pretty big network to look after.
So Liam, I've got a question which we discussed a few weeks ago. It was raised by Higgins, was the amount of abuse that the road workers were getting from the traffic. Are you going to follow that up with Ben to see if it was substantial? Was there anything to report there?
That's definitely a live issue, and the way it's very difficult to manage that, I suppose. The approach we try and take with that is to put good effort into the way we plan works, and the effort is really about how do we do our works in a way that minimises disruption to people. And if we had to do some work which is going to be disruptive, how do we tell people what's going on so that they know well in advance of what's coming up? So it's sort of about managing their expectations and giving them, wherever possible, advice on what their alternatives might be. So quite often in our messaging, we'll be saying things like, consider travelling at a different time if you can, or perhaps maybe if it was relevant, you might be able to take a different route. Not so easy on the Coromandel Peninsula itself.
No.
So what about, is there any benefit in us working with our roading team and comms to put out a message to say, hey, there's only a week or so to go, can we have some, be kind to these roading guys, they're working the best they can. Is there any benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. Just reminding people about that type of stuff is really important.
Liam, I got one for you. That's
Yep.
So really pleased about the reseals and the rechipping and things like that. One of the issues that have been raised recently is the amount of broken windscreens that follow these rechipping, and wonder if they maybe put a road sweeper over the road after it's settled down, just to take that loose metal away and give the people who've got to be a lot of traffic on the road, obviously. So
Yep,
yeah.
That's a good suggestion, Terry. What we normally do is we'll go out to the site and we'll put the bitumen down, then put the chip straight onto it, and then we start to what we call trafficate, which is basically we want to bed the stones into the bitumen, and the easiest, best way of doing it is just getting traffic to do it. And you may have noticed when you go through some of those, we'll sort of, in the morning, maybe they'll be over on the left-hand side of the lane, and then we'll sort of move them into the centre of the lane, and then maybe if there's space to move to the right-hand lane, that's kind of trafficating it. Once that's been done for probably about a day, we do get the sweepers in and go through and sweep it. And at that stage, there'll still be no line markings on that particular site. And then usually, I think it's a day or maybe 2 days after that, we'll come back and do a second sweep as well, because quite often you get sort of what we call windrows, which is where, there's this like channels of chip that sort of sit on the edge or in the centre of the road. So we do want to go and sweep that stuff. Part of the art, I suppose, rather than it being a science, is when they do put the chip down to start with, they have to get, they don't want to put too much on, but also not too little. So sometimes they, I think they do over chip it a little bit. And when they do that, they do go sweep it pretty fast.
Right.
Cool.
Thank you very much, Liam.
So you're welcome to stay, Liam. We'll just progress on to the district manager report, and then we'll get the presentation stuff.
Right.
That's
Excellent.
Sure, thanks. Yep. Just if there's anything confidential or whatever, then just let me know and I'll duck off.
that's fine.
Thank you. Right.
So page 18, we've covered a lot of it already.
Yeah, so can I just move that we receive the summer risk assessment? Are you going to second that, Martin?
I will.
And all those in favour? And then we go on to your report, and which will include planning. So, yeah.
So I just covered pretty much on everything that we've done so far. But what I will do before we get into the work program, if I can ask Pamela to bring up her PowerPoint, and what she's going to do is just dig a little bit deeper into what a community response plan actually is and how it works. So Pamela, over to you.
So I just asking you to see this one text message for the tsunami siren testing in Thames-Coromandel.
Right.
They're looking for a key. So that a key we don't have. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
I'm going to try and keep it brief, but I just wanted to give everybody a quick overview or an idea of what community response planning entails. And that is going to cover where we're up to, what have we completed, what is the process, what do they look like, and what is the value for us and for the communities. So this is a map. I think you guys will remember from my last presentation. This is just to show you we didn't have a blue section before. These are the maps that I, since our last meeting, have updated. So there's 9 of them, and you can see I'm working my way from Whangamata, East Coast, and I'm going to go all the way around the peninsula. So there's in total 28 plans. 26 are pretty much completed or almost there, and 9 have been updated this financial year. I'm just going to run through the process really quickly so you get, and some of this can happen in a really quick time frame. Not many communities do this super fast, but majority of the time it can take probably 3 to 9 months to get a plan on paper and things done. So we start with establishing a group, and that group consists of movers and shakers in a community, people who are passionate or interested, who know the history, who are connected. And I tend to, in the smaller communities, have between 5 and at the most maybe 8 people in a group. In the larger communities, those groups are much larger because we include all of emergency services representatives and then other people who work for community organisations, church groups, and have a big coverage on people they can touch. So establish the group. I explain to the group what the goal is, what we want to achieve, and the commitment is not too huge because we try and meet definitely once a year. Otherwise, it is just email communication or phone communication. The next step is for us to draft our response plan, and that is using the Waikato template that we have. I've in the last just over a year introduced a community survey, which there's a letter that I sit with the group and we work through this letter, and this is, we send it out, council sends it out to all of the residents, and even those who don't live there. So the Ratepayers Association play a big part in this process. They send the letter out to everybody. It's a letter that says this group exists. We work with emergency services and council emergency management. We have a plan to respond because it's very likely that we will be isolated or we'll have to look after ourselves initially before help can arrive. And for us to inform our plan better, we need to know who's in our community, who's here permanently, who needs help, very importantly, and who can offer help. And that help can be in a form of, we have skills, we have resources, we have, so the survey is pretty much the last part of the plan that informs the plan. We then complete the response plan. Once that is done, we work on a community brochure, which I've given you guys a little example of the Te Puru one. That's basically the plan condensed. There's no point in having a plan and the community don't know anything about it. So we, in the plan, we say, these are your known hazards. This is how you know something's going wrong. This is where you go to get information. This is how you get prepared. And pretty much community specific things go into that plan. For instance, with Te Puru, we tell them where their notice boards are. We tell them specifically where their evacuation points are. And on the back, we have a tsunami evacuation or inundation map. Now, to add to my process of community response planning, I am adding the tsunami signage project onto that. So once we have an updated plan, we have an updated brochure, we then, with the group, work on placing tsunami evacuation route signs, safe zone signs, and information boards. And then I go around and do it all again next year. So that is the process. So I've given you just an example of what a plan looks like. I've given you Hahe's example because they've literally just completed it in the last week. Just so you have an idea of what is in a plan. At the beginning of the plan, we basically set out the purpose and an overview of what is the ideal state we want the community to be in by when. Very importantly, we work through, and it's pretty similar for most communities on the peninsula, is known hazards. I add into the plan just a map, so that on the day, if we have nothing else, we have a bit of a map to work with. And then I've just recently added in local community statistics, and that's how do they get water, what is the resident population, what is the age, just a little bit of demographics and statistics on the area. That what I have in the plan currently is, I think, 2012, 2013 information. I am struggling, and I just saw it on the outside actually, to find out where's the latest information. So all plans will have 2018, I believe, statistics in their plans, which would be very helpful on the day, I think. We then look at what are the alerts and the warning signals and what actions to take. So for instance, if it was a near source tsunami threat, what do we anticipate will happen? What do you look out for and what do you do? And where do you go to get information, which would be the next section, which is alerting platforms. How do you stay informed, or how do you get informed? That includes everything from the EMA to the Red Cross Hazards app, radio stations, med service websites, Power Co websites, all information resources that we have. Following that, we cover off various options in locations we can use to set up community-led centres. And in these plans, we're very specific in saying that it is a community-led centre, not a civil defence centre. As a council, we have 6 identified locations for our civil defence centres: Thames-Coromandel, Whitianga, Kairua, Whangamata, and sorry, I forgot our Te. So those are our 6 locations on State Highway 26 that we will set up as civil defence centres, but the ones in the plans are community-led centres. So it's a location that could be, we have to give a variety of options because all emergencies are different. So we don't narrow it down. We don't share this with the community either. We don't put it in our brochure. It is basically on the day, we will see in the event what is the safest place to use. Then probably one of the most important sections in the plan is the resources that are available. And we start off with pretty generic stuff, but when the survey is completed, we add in other resources that we didn't know about into the plan. Alternative communication. We like to, as a group, sit and discuss what they have at their fingertips. I don't know about a lot of things that are available in the community, and the alternative communication is really good locally. For example, Onimana have now a very driven, active and passionate young group, and they have just spent, I believe, close to $8,000 on handheld radios so that they can talk amongst themselves in their community. And this is all community funded and driven, and it's a small community. I suppose they could probably walk to each other and talk to them, but they have, each road has a leader who is responsible for checking on their road and their people, and all those leaders on each road, and I think there's only 6 roads, have one of these radios. Again, we just discuss wider communication, so I make sure that the groups know that how they can get in contact with me, and as a general rule of thumb, it is through Fire and Emergency New Zealand. Very importantly, we try and keep it quite generic, and the vulnerable groups in our plan is the elderly, school children and travellers. Those are the stock standard vulnerable groups. But once we've completed our survey, we then hold a more accurate record of specific vulnerable people in the community, where they're at and what do they need.
So you might have people that are on dialysis or oxygen or whatever, so would the communities know that level of detail, or is that a privacy issue?
We hold the survey information. Members of the group generally have St John's and fire and emergency or police involved. Yes, they hold that information as well. The problem is, and I've had a big discussion with somebody in Haha yesterday, is we gather all this information and within 6 months it's outdated and old. So again, we have to start a bit of a movement, and it's new, that we are part of this list. We have to update it annually. From our perspective, we have to push for that, but we also need to get it known in the community that this list exists and that annually or regularly we need to update this. It's a slow process, but we're getting there. Very important at the end of the plan is usually the call-out procedure. Everybody knows what to do or where to go when there is communications, but we do discuss a few options of how do you get called out and when do you respond if there is no communications. If the wall's gone black, how do you know what to do and where will we meet? Those kind of things. So that moves me to the next slide. Oh no, this is the slide. Is the value of community response in our district. So the value that I can see for our communities is that they feel reassured and safe. They a level of, they're not forgotten. There is discussions. It allows for locals to consider options or to have discussions in times of peace before an event happens. So in my experience, for instance, Te Peru as an example, we didn't have a plan in place, but we had our initial first community response meeting and a group of locals had sat down, considered what would we do in certain situations, and that worked on the day brilliantly. Yeah. Even if it's not on paper, it's an opportunity to start thinking. Very important is that we keep our plans very fluid and changeable, if that's even a word, because emergencies are delivered something different on the day. So I think community response planning is a form of keeping people connected with them, amongst themselves and with council. It also gives communities responsibility and a sense of, removes the sense of powerlessness. It's a form of education, so when I go and meet with these groups, information is passed on, and the education relieves a lot of nerves and uncertainty. When you're a little bit more educated, you have a sense of power. Yeah. And then probably very important is the communication or the connection that we have or they have with us. So that's the value I see for this planning from a community perspective, but from a council perspective, again, the value to us, it's reassurance that there is a plan in place. Reassurance is big when it comes to us scrambling, something's happening. We don't have to worry that much. We know that we've had conversations, there is a plan, we can communicate, we know what to expect, they know what to expect.
It's so important.
Yeah. It is a great form of communication, it's a great link for us into communities, and it is very important for intelligence gathering because we have these contacts, they know who we are, we can get information from them, whether we call them for it or they just freely give it to us because they know where to go. And it also is fulfilling council's statutory role of enabling, empowering and supporting community resilience.
Thanks, Pam. Any questions or comments?
I got a question.
Can I just take Martin first, Terry, and then you?
Yep, no trouble.
Thanks, Terry.
So I was up at the Te Peru Hall on Saturday for radio play, And after we did the radio play, we had a bit of a presentation, first of all, about the hall itself, and then 3 women stood up and talked about they were the 3 main people, I think, in the, what do they call the local response?
Emergency response group, Lewis, Colleen and Penny.
Yes. And yeah, I thought it was great that they were, doing that, presenting in front of a hall full of people. They talked about the telephone tree, and I think they've got 2/3 of the people in Te Puru on this tree, and they've got different zones. I think they aim to have 1 person in each street.
Yeah.
And they were pretty close to that. So that was good to see. The other thing, and I don't know whether they mentioned this to you, but they had a storage container that sandbags were stored in, and that got pinched, and some of the sandbags got damaged. And so they were looking for some locals to build by the hall another little storage type thing for sandbags. The other thing they were asking for help from locals was to put a garden shed together that was going to be an alternative sort of backup place somewhere in the community to have another set of their emergency gear. So I just thought, well, it might be useful to pass that on to you folks, but we'll really aware of that.
That's an example of a very active,
Yes,
proactive, let's go out and do stuff.
Yeah.
I wish we had more budget to help them. We have given them everything we could in terms of a bin with resources to set up themselves. I believe they already had a storage shed, but they now want a second one.
No, just through the chair. So they're connected in through the hall committee, and so they do funding applications through the hall committees, and that funds the funding applications. They've got quite a bit of money now, and that does fund their text alert system that they fund for that, and they've bought the shed. So it's only the one shed, it just hasn't been put up yet. They're looking for a location.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're definitely aware of the things that they're doing, but it is completely a community initiative.
Yeah, and they were very much saying we're after local help
Yeah.
to put that shed together or
Yeah.
find a site for it. So yeah, you're right.
It's really good to
They
see.
did seem to be really switched on, and it sort of gives.
That's community response just in action.
Yeah.
It's the gold standard.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And the Thames Community Board needs to remember that and when there's grant applications and things like that in terms of the whole community. Right, thanks Martin. Terry?
Yes, just want to say that Pam, that's great what's going on here and the information you're putting out and the connection with the communities and meeting our requirements. I just wonder, would it be great to test the plan? Take a small community, you'd have to pick it right and do a dummy run and see what the learnings were. Wouldn't that be great?
Yes, that would be lovely. We're running simulation events or doing tests is extremely time consuming. However, we do have a very active group in Whangamata, and I know that, there you are. Andrew Hodgson from Fire and Emergency, we plan, we're probably within the next year. We have enough events to practice, I think, Terry. But what I do want to practice, and we're going to have an opportunity in Whangamata, is to set up a welfare centre. We're going to do a little bit of more training with our community response groups, training supervisors and people to open up community-led centres. And we will do a practice on opening up a welfare centre because we don't practice that enough. Oh, yeah, not in our district. We do activate a lot and we share a lot of information and they respond really quickly and really well. That's the kind of exercise I think we're planning on running within the next 12 months.
Because we've got a KPI, haven't we, about events and training to the staff. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. Liam, did you want to say something?
Yep, if I can. Pam, thanks, Pam. I was wondering, I had a question, like if you, or when we do have an event, and the thing passes through. I guess the community is going to be interested in finding out a bit about what's happening around the transport network and what's, what their options are. If they are isolated, when they may become unisolated. Do you have any preferences, or do you give the communities any guidance on when and where to look for that sort of information?
Yes.
Like, could it go directly through you, for example? Would you like to sort of be across that communication, or would you just direct them to our websites, for example?
I have been directing them to your website. However, it is quite a sore point in a lot of communities that the website is not up to date. People are coming through. The website hasn't caught up yet. People need to get to medical appointments. So maybe this is a conversation between you and me on how I can inform you better and you can put information out faster.
Yep. I do remember, just on that point, in the past, there's definitely been an issue around the speed of updating information. When we put stuff on our website, we want to make sure that it's been verified as true and correct, as opposed to people just sort of phoning up about stuff, which isn't to say that when they do phone up it's incorrect or misleading, but it's just sort of, I guess, what we want to do. And Gary and I remember probably quite a while ago talked about making an improvement there. Normally people who would verify stuff would have to be either our contractors or police, but we sort of took the step of making councils, contractors and council staff a trusted source of information as well, so they could phone through to our TOC and whatever you guys were reporting was going to be verified as true and correct. So that's sort of one step we made to try and speed up how quickly we get correct information up, but social media is hard to keep on top of, that's for sure.
But you are aware that we do have access to ATOC, which is the Auckland Traffic Control, they do the signs, so staff have direct access as well now, so Liam's created that, once again, just to add to the efficiency, so we know that there's something true that can bring them up.
They can know before they get over the hill, kind of thing. Yeah, that's excellent.
But it has improved a lot, and we use the NZTA website a lot. Comms grab it immediately, and also active as well.
But Liam, I have quick access into these communities, and majority of communities, there's someone in the group who is directly linked to moderating their local pages.
Oh, yep.
Social media pages. So yeah, if maybe you just put me on that immediate communications list, or you and I talk when it affects our district.
Yep. Cool. So we can maybe put some plans in place to just sort of work out what and how we would engage with each other and share info.
Cool. You've got your hand up, Terry.
Yeah, just a quick one to Liam. Some of the information that I've received is about the electronic notice boards at NZTA, or some of the larger countries are putting on their highways or areas to tell people, because that information is considered verbatim right on the button. That's another way of getting that information out quick. Then people say they read it and they'll spread it. Yep.
Yeah, so we do have a few boards on a lot of the approaches to the peninsula, which we use for sort of managing or giving people information about what's happening on the peninsula, and therefore they'll be able to make their own options around travel. I.e., if one side of the peninsula is shut, then they would know before as they're approaching the peninsula, that they would need to go the other way, as an example. And then I know Gary's got some mobile VMS trailers which we can roll out, and we've got some as well. So when we do have these big weather systems approaching, we often take the opportunity to go and move those into certain places so that we are able to update communities.
Cool.
No,
Thank you very much.
I think it just demonstrates the fact that through the collaboration team that we set up many years ago, our relationship with Liam now is like kind of, it's seamless, and of course during the response, of course, I'm on the phone with Liam quite often regarding what we're doing. Of course, it covers it's not just roads, it's a whole lot of stuff that goes with it. So it's just an example of collaboration working well.
Yes, so thank you. From where I'm sitting, it's really noticeable, the collaboration and cooperation. So all support for that. Thank you very much. And thanks, Pam, for all your work, because as you said, Julian, before, it's about community up, isn't it? No matter how amazing CEOs are, if they can't get to Te Puru for a week, well then, it's no point at all.
I did have another slide which was just going to explain really briefly how it works. For instance, let's just say COVID, how it works in that response. If for any foreseeable event, obviously things work really well because we get information, we simplify it, we're quite direct in like, we're expecting this is what we expect you to do, share the message. So we get to communicate directly into our communities before events. Then the event happened, COVID or a weather event, we then have the ability, one of the first things we do when we activate an EOC, even if we're just on standby, is we go through our contacts in each community and we start calling every single person so they don't feel left out. We're not waiting for them to call us to tell us there's a problem. We actually go straight to them and say, how is it in your patch? Have you got anything to report? You might not have anything now, but call me when you do. So this is how we stay in contact, and that communication is two ways from the start.
Cool. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much. And
So, yeah, well, without further ado, we in Napier, a couple of weeks ago, they put their call to arms, and we, through the group, a request came to speak, and Helen bravely gave up her time and her style. So I thought it was a good timely thing just to show the committee what a deployment actually entails. So if you're okay with that, I'll give the floor to Helen.
So I'll just go through that deployment process and then a little bit about what actions we take when we're in somebody else's patch helping out.
I'm going to sign off now. Thanks for having me.
thank you,
Thanks,
very
Liam.
much. Good to
Thanks,
meet
guys.
you. Bye.
And then as you identified before, Sally, that there's always learnings about it. So a few of the learnings. So we, Napier, I think it was the Monday, they had the weather event, and on the Wednesday, this is 11:14, a text goes out to say that they need help. So within the Emergency Coordination Centre at Hawke's Bay, they've been activated for a number of days, and they've identified, right, our staff are completely burnt out, we're going to need to bring people in for the weekend, which I think is exactly what we would be doing as well in any of these events. So 11:14, we get the text as CDM professionals. NEMA are asking for assistance, the Napier Flood looking for a welfare and intelligence manager, 5 days, 12-hour shifts, name required by 12:45. So short turnaround in terms of get some names in. Behind the scenes, Julian's team have a deployment spreadsheet that consists basically of all the civil defence professionals in their key roles that they can undertake. So it just speeds up when I text back. I check in with Gary, Gary checks with Rob, CEO, is it going to be okay for him to go on the deployment list? So I think 15 minutes later I would have had my name. Try to say yes, I can help out in either welfare or intelligence. So that was the Wednesday. My experience, because I've been on deployment standby lists a number of times, is that you pack the bag and you don't go, because this has gone out, this has been sent out to all the country's civil defence professionals, and to me they're looking for two staff. So first groups will always pull on the neighbours. The next morning, so that was Wednesday, the next morning I was on my way to Hamilton for a day of meetings anyway, so at 6:30 I'm in the car. And so I got 7:30 a message to say, yes, please, we want you, can you come today? So luckily, when they had packed it, that's what I do, is throw a suitcase in the car. I know I've got the basics, but it meant that they were having a little difficulty finding accommodation and flights, because that weekend was the Commissioner's Statement, yeah, so the whole of Napier was full in terms of accommodation, because people had decided, oh, well, we'll go anyway. And so the accommodation was full. And they couldn't get flights, but in actual fact, by the time I've driven to Hamilton, you know, it's actually just as easy to drive and have your own car. In my experiences, it's much better to have your own car because you never know where they put you and you never know where you've got to go to. So there was a team in the end, in that deployment, I think they called in 8 to 10 people from around the country, of which 4 were from the Waikato. So myself, Vicky Cowley, who's the welfare manager in Manukau Piako, Stu Ashton, Civil Defence Professional at South Waikato, and Philippa Clare, who's a Hamilton City Council staff member but a local welfare manager. So what they basically did is said yes to everybody, which I think was a really good result, a really good response for them because of where they were at in their response. They had their local team burnt out and they were at the stage where they were having to pull together, really get their head around the initial responses happened and now what are the issues that we've got to deal with, mostly welfare, and how are we going to arrange longer term solutions for some of this. And so calling on people that have had a little bit of experience in that is really useful. So that was, the text is Wednesday midday, 7:30 Thursday morning. I've got the yes please come to Hawke's Bay to report to report to Hastings, 7 a.m. the next morning. So I just can't pull down with somebody. It was Vicky from Manukau, I left directly from Hamilton. So when we arrived, so the weather event was one where they had 100 mils of rain, which for the Coromandel was nothing. So it was, you know, it's contextual, isn't it? In 8 hours, so midday to 8 p.m, they had 100 mils of rain. And the impact there was on the flat it had flooded and on the hills it had slipped. So there was a real widespread flooding. I think that was a few days into it, at least 117 acre floodland and slip damage claims made. When I arrived, they had 90 uninhabitable houses. So between 12 o'clock the event had started. By 10 p.m. that night, they declared a state of emergency, and they'd had Fire Emergency New Zealand and council staff door knocking and evacuating people. I think they had about 170 people that they evacuated that night to a local motel. So we went down mostly as the welfare team went in, mostly to provide that support to the welfare function. The group welfare manager who was working in the Emergency Coordination Centre had not been in the role long. She'd done an amazing job and she had really good, because of prior linkages in her previous jobs, had really good welfare relationships. So what we do when we arrive, what we did, those of us that came in, there was, of the 16 groups across New Zealand, I worked with 4 group welfare managers. So that was just such a privilege. I mean, I know these people, I've met them in training and we've had conversations, but it's not very often that you get the privilege of working alongside some of these people. One particularly, you know, she was the welfare manager for Canterbury earthquakes, Kaikoura earthquake, you know, has heaps of experience. So it was putting together for the Hawke's Bay Group welfare manager a bit more of a structured plan about how she progressed from where they were in that knee-jerk response mode through into working with their welfare partner agencies, with NSD, with MPI in terms of housing for longer term solutions. So one of the key things, I had a number of roles. The first day they wanted a civil defence centre set up, so they'd taken over an empty pharmacy. They had tables and chairs, and they had a number of community agencies available. Munshi such a one at Kaikoura, because there was over 40 state houses, the Kaikoura housing were habitable. They had the local iwi groups, the local iwi health group. So the agencies were there, and they had a couple of civil defence centre staff, nobody who was trained, in this empty building. So my role was to go in and help them get that set up. Now that was so exciting for me because I've been teaching civil defence centre training for 7 years. I have never set one. I'm always in the emergency operating centre.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that lives in my car. You know, I've got a whole pack of stuff, and where they were, they didn't have a printer, they had Wi-Fi by that stage, but I turn up with my folder of forms. Somebody runs down to the local council, and we structured and set up. So they had the civil defence centre supervisor was this guy James from Thames-Coromandel, had been the civil defence for about 6 months, excellent at running, just needed a bit of structure. So that was really, really good. That first day was setting up the civil defence centre. So they had also a needs assessment call centre where 2 of our other Waikato staff went in to run the call centre. And that was one of the first things that we worked out we needed to do was transition the call centre into the civil defence centre so that people who were falling out with tricky issues had access to the agencies just to go and talk to them and find out solutions. So the group welfare manager had gone away for 2 days later, and by the time she'd come back, we moved the needs assessment calls, we reduced the number we were registering, we moved them into the civil defence centre, and we started doing the transition planning. So writing for her the transition from response to recovery plan, so she had a template, which was basically, currently these are all the welfare actions that you're undertaking, these are the agencies that are helping you with those, this is council's, what council's doing, and when you go to recovery, these are the ongoing issues and these are the agencies and the people that will need to take these over. So putting that plan together, which is one that it's the sort of advantage that happens when you get people coming in from outside to help, is that we come in with those templates.
Yeah.
So Gary had said to talk about previous deployments. Well, normally whenever there's something happening, it's also happening here. So it's not very often that we get to move out of our area to go and help elsewhere. But the one time I did was Kakura earthquakes, where I went to Puranui Council for 5 days and then went to the group office in Christchurch for a couple of days. And some of the reports that particular template that I had was one I developed back then that is now been socialised to all of us use the same one. And I've also gained other resources from that deployment that, for instance, there was a whole lot of health and safety plans that I picked up from that Christchurch deployment that I now have as our stock kit. So that ability to share resources is really useful. And the benefits, these are some of us in our welfare team. And as I was saying, working alongside 4 of the group welfare managers, Nikki Parker was actually originally trained as a civil defence in our area and is now the group welfare manager at Bay of Plenty. She's had a lot of action since then for Kāpi Point Island, Edgekin. But as well as the welfare team, there was other people that we've met within the group emergency coordination centre from other areas, and every single one of them is, well, if you've got any issues up your way, we'll be there. So it's building those relationships, but also understanding what their competencies are, so that if we do have them deployed into our area, which could be a possibility this summer. But you know, it was really worthwhile me going down to build those relationships. So I've got all these people on standby ready to come at a moment's notice, 1 or 2 of whom are holidaying in the Coromandel. It also generated for me a few issues that they were dealing with. The key one they had was their needs assessment. So they had an 800 number set up. People were calling in, and then they had this really bulky, it looked good. The dashboard there that you see, you know, the number of calls and the location and all of that looked really good, but behind the scenes, every 15 minutes, somebody was manually downloading the SharePoint database and then copying and pasting into an Excel spreadsheet. It was clunky in terms of we weren't sure what had been actioned and not actioned. So one of our functions for our team was to work out what was happening there and work out what the issues were and try and get the process map done up so that we could fully understand what's happening. I came away going, we absolutely need to make sure we've got this nailed before we get into our summer. So we, in the Waikato Regional Council's GA's guy, Derek Finn, is amazing. He helped with, he developed really the original needs assessment system we were using in COVID. So that's been refined and is basically ready to stand up again, probably 15 months notice, he could have that up and running. But what I've identified is the questions that are asked in that are not the same as what you would ask in a weather event. So we've been working on ensuring before Christmas that we've got a second needs assessment system and template ready to stand up. That's for all hazards. So we've got all we have to do is get all the welfare managers across the Waikato to sign off. I think we've had a working group working on the questions, and the sign off is due tomorrow. And if we get it to Derek by the 11th, he's pretty sure he'll be able to have that needs assessment system ready to go. Had I not gone to Napier, I probably would never have thought through how important it was to get that ready. Because we were there 5 days into it and they were still hearing their hair out and having work hours. It was taking 2 or 3 staff just to keep the thing running. So that was one real benefit. The second one is the importance of the civil defence centre training. Now, we've put a bit of focus on it the last few years. We've got quite a few trained civil defence centre supervisors, but have shifted a little bit to actually, if there's an event that happens, our State Highway 25 is likely to be cut off, and it's more likely community-led centres that are set up. So we've been focusing on those community groups and community-led centres. But out of this is 2 actions. One is to ensure that we have got a 2-hour community-led centre course that covers basic training for our community response groups. We didn't run it in 2019, but it's back on the program to rerun in 2021 because we've got new groups, because the groups have changed. And that just does cover a bit of the basic health and safety, how to communicate with the emergency operating centre, that sort of thing. The second one is identifying actually we do need to train up and focus completely on civil defence centre supervisors so that they're trained. So we're intending to run another course. It'll be a Waikato, anybody in Waikato to come, but in March in our area we'll definitely run another course and restart that rotation of civil defence centre supervisor training. Because although we've got quite a number of people trained, it's a matter of making sure that they're scattered around the Coromandel should the roads close. And the reason for that is exactly what happened in Napier, is we rely, our first port of call when someone is evacuated, have you got family and friends to stay with? The second is commercial accommodation, but we know there is none. So we can't put people in hotels and hotels. We are likely to be in a situation where we will have to sleep people in halls, and there's a whole lot of health and safety stuff around that, and definitely some training needed. We will, if something happened over the summer, I think we've got sufficient staff trained in the main areas, Whirianga, Whangatā, Tairua, Paranui, Coromandel, Thames. We've got staff in those areas, so I've got a little bit of confidence that would be not too much of an issue. In terms of cost, there's minimal cost to council and deployment. Any flights and accommodation and catering is generally paid for by the group that is got the call out for the assistance. The cost that council would have incurred is my time and the fact that I took my car. And I think benefits are huge in terms of particularly the relationships. Yeah. The other training need is, that GA's, how it was really useful to have the GA's display, and we've identified, we know that's sort of a gap in our area in terms of, we've only got one GA's person now, we used to have two, so it's really hard to remove them from their behaviour and get them trained up, but a 2021 goal, I think. Any questions?
That's great.
So the needs assessment system, so is that a combination of paper-based and electronic-based? Because you said that one behind that dashboard was like a database and a spreadsheet.
Yeah, so it's a Servo 123 into ArcGIS.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I can understand what you just said.
Yeah.
I understand what GIS is.
Yeah. So there's a form on your phone. You talk to people, you fill in your form on the phone or the tablet. When you've got Wi-Fi, it'll upload into a shared database.
Okay.
And from that shared database, out comes the mapping, out comes, we can export into Excel spreadsheets, we can report, that we can filter by, this would be run as a Waikato-wide one, so we can filter by area. So we just pull out the TCDC, if we set up with Thames Valley, like Hakelan and Kiako, we can filter up the 3 council data show.
So, but that's not a consistent thing across the country, each area has their different.
There is, behind the scenes, there has been in development a consistent needs assessment system for across the country. It's not ready. It didn't work.
So I think it's fair to say, so there is something called a FINA, so for you self-country, what you're highlighting is absolutely spot on. There is no national consistency in relation to needs assessment. And if you want to take it back to a really local level, you go back to January, whatever it was, 2018, and you saw different agencies come to support the response here. And Red Cross were using a different application to the 3 different councils doing needs assessments. It was, even at a kind of national agency level, there's no consistency. At a regional level, there was some inconsistencies. So that multiply that by 16 civil defence groups, that's the picture. So NEMA have got an action in the national plan to provide for a consistent, nationally consistent welfare needs assessment, but it's hit funding issues, and it's also COVID has probably created a death knell because a number of the groups created, as Helen's talked, we created our own here.
Yeah.
And when you, being frank, our own system and the experience of the others is probably, it's more efficient and effective than the one that hadn't been completed. So
sometimes making those countrywide things, A, costs a fortune, B, doesn't result in a great product. It's probably C as well.
So it's been parked, they haven't finished it, they've parked it pending a review, they being NEMA, parked it pending a review of where's the funding going to come from to progress that national product. And also, if they're going to invest any resource into it, what is the likely the uptake from civil defence groups across the country before they put the money into something that no one's going to use because we've got our own product that's more effective than the one that they've currently got. Their assessment?
Yeah. But and the final thing about the paper-based form, as soon as we've got this signed off, we actually want a paper-based form as well, because we know from our experience that there are events here, we can go for days, isolated communities without Wi-Fi. So, that's something that, like during COVID wasn't an issue because there's no issue with communication.
Right.
Yeah. But it's something we have to factor into our full passage forms.
Well, thank you very much. So we'll go through the work programme, give Julian an opportunity to update anything he wants, and is that the plan?
Well, he's got to be said.
Oh, right, he's already updated it.
Okay, work programme, we'll just go through this quickly. Everything is either on track or revised or progressing except for sirens. So just a reminder that by the 30th of September next year, we will disconnect all of the paging systems from the siren network. There's no publicity, we're not doing any promotion regarding sirens whatsoever this summer. We're just quietly going about our business, and it's just like a quiet death. Pururi, so what's happening now is the contractors are going around doing a maintenance check of all the sirens because we have to maintain them.
That's where the core paddle.
Yeah.
And Pururi is problematic, and so I've made the call to disconnect that now. Instead of spending, what, $5,000 getting it fixed, we said, no, let's just do it. So that's what's going to happen. So progressively, the paging system will be discontinued. February, Thames and ourselves will get together, we're going to a roadshow. And we'll be going around the peninsula to every community with a siren, or a network of sirens, and we'll be doing a presentation as to why they've been disconnected, and here's the alternative options that you have at your disposal.
Right.
So it's a bit of work there, but it's a plan that we're going to get through summer and then we're going to deal with it. So we're on track, everything's happening with that. The rest of the work programme, probably in a sense, we're gearing up for summer.
Yes.
So apart from getting some training done, getting the staff resources sorted, the work program is primarily just been ticking across. Very pleased to see, and thank you to the members, is that our priority of $221,000 is in the A list for next year, which means that following on from the siren disconnection, the whole tsunami and evacuation and community emergency management will have a really good budget that we can get into and do a really good job of that. So we're going to start planning for that straight after summer.
It does absolutely feel like a must do.
Well, it's good, and it dovetails from the tsunami
Yeah.
siren disconnection. It's good time, and there's some decent money there as well. So apart from that, Madam Chair, I think unless there's questions.
Anyone got any questions? How are you going, Terry? Are you still there? No, he's on the phone. Right, we'll just keep going. Anything else anyone wants to say? I'll take members' reports. Terry's on the phone. Do you want to say anything, Martin?
Just the experience out to Peru.
Right.
And, yes, so you can just rehash what I said.
He had a good time doing a radio play, and then he received that information. I think, I don't think I've got anything to report. Yeah, I just feel as if I approached the summer sort of having a sense that we've done what we can in terms of risk assessment and yeah, and then it's just a matter of seeing what happens. No one can tell that exactly. So, and I think that's what I think for me, the COVID thing, and people still talk about they want certainty, and there isn't certainty. And no matter how good the army or the police are at the border, etc., you know, we live in certain uncertain times, and I think we have to get used to that. And you people live in that environment all of the time. So just want to acknowledge that. Is there anything you want to add to the meeting, Julian?
No.
Right. Terry, we've just sort of summing up, is there anything you want to say?
No, it's been an interesting meeting. Sorry, I had another call I had to take then. No, it's, I just go back to Julian's points that we have to be clear about who's really in charge and how many people have you got support, and making sure you're comfortable with that. The unknowns are what we have to deal with, but the knowns we can deal with, we should be resilient and as best we can. So yeah, all the best. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Well, safe journeys, everyone, and I'll hop in and say hello for Christmas.
Are you around?
I'm around, or I'm not going anywhere. So because if Sandra is elsewhere, yeah, so I'm around.
So that's our alternative. If we do have to declare anything else, I'll defer to Sally. So as long as the mayor will sell it close by, that's.
And if I win lotto, there's no accommodation anywhere and I can't go to Bali, so I will be there.
Good times.
Yes. So thank you, everybody. Yes, our last meeting for the year. And just need to do some form stuff. So we need to receive the district manager report. So Martin and Terry, and we received the members' reports, which were basically nothing, and then we have to go into exclude the public. I'll move that, Martin seconding it, and